Right. In this lesson, we're going to look at how to make a parallax 3D zoom using After Effects. This is a good way to work with 2D layers in 3D space so that it doesn't really highlight the fact that these are 2D layers in 3D space. So this is an example of the final project we'll be making. Let's go ahead and play it on. You can see that it's very different from your standard zoom. If you had just scaled up the image, you can see a little bit more dimensionality between the different layers. And you can also tell that we started at a little bit higher angle and we swooped down, which is a little bit more of an advanced technique that we'll do towards the end. Okay. So you're going to start out by first importing your parallax example file that was provided for you. You can do that by going to File, Import, File, and then just finding that parallax example file. Make sure you do turn on composition retain layer sizes, and then click open. Okay, and of course composition retain layer sizes will actually bring the layers in as separate layers and also crop the art down to just the layer as opposed to making it the full size of the document. And you can double click to go inside and everything will be set up for you and properly named. You have your cars layer, your tables, you have your street and sidewalk, front buildings, back buildings, and then this back layer, which is just a gradient that shows through the back buildings a little bit and kind of gives us this purplish tint in the background. The first thing we're going to need to do is turn on 3D for some of these layers. And if you're not seeing your switches right here, I would check your toggle switches and mode button down here if you're seeing track mats and your blend modes. And that'll turn you back into seeing your switches. And to turn 3D on for these layers, you're just going to enable the switch for the different layers that you want. And we're going to do it for our cars, tables, front building, and back building layer. So turn the switch on for all 4 of those layers. And what you might notice when you turn the switch on is that things change a little bit within your normal layer transforms. So let's check that out real quick before we get into actually building this. So let's select my cars and press P to get my position. And right away we can see that we had X, Y, and now we have a new value for Z, which is going to be the distance from the camera. When you have it selected, you can also see that you have these 3 arrows. They're red, green, and blue, and they represent X, Y, and Z. So if you remember R, G, B, X, Y, Z, they correlate to the 2 of them. So red is X, green is Y, and then blue is Z. Also, if you press R, you'll get your rotation properties. And you'll see that you now have 4 properties that make this up. There's an orientation, and there's an individual X, Y, and Z rotation. The one that we're usually used to is the Z rotation, which rotates it along the Z axis. The Y and the X rotation are a little bit new, and of course the orientation is new. Now the orientation looks like it does the exact same thing as the rotation, but the orientation has a lot more limitations to it. You got to be very careful. You should not be doing animation with your orientation. What you should be doing for your orientation is setting up the initial rotation and then animating the rotation based off of that. There's a couple reasons for this. One, all the values are linked together, and it's better to have individual values. That way you can stagger the start and end of each rotation. It's also helpful that these have what's called revolution counters. So every time you do a full 360, it'll put a 1 there, and then if you do another one, it'll do a 2, and so on and so forth. So it will be able to tell how many times you want to do full rotations, and this doesn't have that. And then finally, this doesn't recognize negative numbers. So if I go backwards, you can see it just starts back from 360. And that means that in some instances, it may not know which way you actually want to rotate, and making things a little bit more difficult. So easy thing to remember is just never animate from your orientation. Just set up your initial rotation from this, and then you animate based off of these ones. Right. Now that we got that all set up, let's go ahead and start setting up our art a little bit. First thing we want to do is you want to take off some of this fake perspective that was originally put on here. These were shifted down to make it look like they're coming forward more, because if you've ever worked with 1-point perspective before, basically our horizon line would probably be about right here. And as things move, if things are below the horizon line and they move towards the camera, they're going to look like they go lower. If they're above the horizon line and they move towards the camera, they're going to look like it goes higher. Same is true for left and right as well. Okay, and we're going to see that when we actually start sliding this in real 3D space. So we want to take this off for now. So I'm going to go ahead and take my cursor, with my car selected, I'm going to hover over this green arrow. You can see that it highlights a Y next to my cursor. And that means that when I click and drag on it, it'll only move along the Y-axis. I'm going to bring it up just a little bit below where my buildings are, because this is going to be sitting off the sidewalk a little bit, so it's going to have a little bit of a drop down. Then I'm also going to take my tables and move those up a little bit. Zoom in some so I can see a little better. And these are going to be aligned to the bottom of my buildings. Now the front building and the back building should already have the same bottom to them. Let's see, the front building looks like it's actually a little bit too low. But just leave where it is. I don't know why it's reading art down here, but it is. And then the back building also ends there. So those are fine. You don't have to move those at all. But what we do want to do is we want to move all these anchor points. And this is going to become very important later on when we have to scale these and also when we have to have them rotate a little bit. That way they stay aligned to the sidewalk. So let me start with my back buildings first. Let's select my back buildings. I'm going to grab my anchor point tool up here, also known as the pan behind tool. And then I'm going to grab this green arrow. You can see that it changes to a Y, and click and drag down. And I just want to align it to the bottom of my front buildings. Zoom in a little bit. So you can see it's right there at the bottom of the doors. I'm going to do the same thing for my front buildings. Lower this down so it lines to the same vertical space. And then the same for the tables. They don't have to go down too far, just a little bit so they line to where the actual tables and chairs meet the ground. And the cars are going to be a little bit lower. They're going to be aligned to the bottom of their layers. If you just slide it down to the bottom of where these tires are. And that'll get us all set up before we actually have to move into 3D space yet.